Welcome back, everybody, to the Tuesday night version of Getting Defensive, brought to you by GridironRatings.com. I'm your host, Kraig, brought to you, with me, as always. Just woke up from a nap, an accidental nap, falling asleep with my kids. But with me, as always, we have Gary, the IDP tipster, and we have James. We'll be going over sort of the third version of free agency, taking a little bit of an in-depth look at players here for the third show in a row, second show with us, and then Thursday they're doing that as well. But James, how are you doing? I know you said you hadn't taken a nap, so that's one out of the three of us today.
Hey, technically both of you guys are more well-rested than I am, but I don't think that matters too much here on the Getting Defensive podcast, as we're ready to go, and we're ready to have some hot takes on some nice little, smaller signings, not the biggest ones that we're going to come across this free agency, but ones that might end up mattering a lot. We're going to take a look here and see, and I'm ready to get it going.
Gary, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Got me a little power nap, like you mentioned just a little bit ago, so I could make it through tonight. I see James has nice California cloudiness behind you, I think. It doesn't look like it's really beaming. Is it beaming? Really? Yeah, it's a little bit better shot. It looks pretty nice comparably out here. It's been raining in Ohio for seems like all day, and it's been dark for a couple of hours. We're all got us a break, James. We're just, as we was talking, Kraig has 5 little ones, folks. 5 little. What's the oldest?
9 and I think almost 8 months now. So
wow.
Yeah, we got a nice spread to keep us active on our toes.
Yeah, that's different levels of chaos.
Well, speaking of chaos, that's a good thing to bring up here as we're going to be getting into this. We got, like James said, some moves that maybe aren't going to be on your average size league radar necessarily. A couple of them will be, but these are probably more deeper guys to look at. But it's good to know how it can affect those around them too, which we'll get into. But before I get into that too far, if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you. We always want to thank you guys that are dedicated to watching us there. Make sure you hit that like button. I'm sure you're subscribed already, but if not, please do so. Get the notifications on. Leave us a comment if you have any sort of questions at all during the show or after related to this topic or anything else IDP-wise. You can find us here, and you can also find us on Twitter. So thank you, and please let us know if you need anything. We are going to start off the night here talking about a couple of safeties with moves that are related. First one is Marcus Williams. He's going to be 26 this year, coming from New Orleans, going to Baltimore on a 5-year, $70 million deal. Really, it's sort of a 3 or 4 year deal with the outs that they have with 13.5 and then 6.7 in dead cap after those respective years. The other safeties that they have there currently in Baltimore are Chuck Clark, who we've talked about quite a bit on this show before. Tony Jefferson, blast from the past, they brought back last year. And then Brandon Stevens, Geno Stone, and Darius Washington. So, Gary, I'm going to go to you for this one. It kind of seems like it's going to be Marcus Williams and then Chuck Clark. So how are you liking the fit here with Marcus Williams to the Ravens?
Why, as a signing in the NFL, I love it for Baltimore. I mean, Marcus Williams is a really good, underrated guy. And the reason he is underrated, at least from the fantasy football IDP standpoint, is he's never really ever been an upper tier player that people like to target for leagues. I mean, he's never really broke the threshold of tier 2, in my opinion. I've never had him more than just possibly a bye week player or something. He is good if the matchup's right, but those matchups aren't always right for him. So most of the time you can find him on most waiver wires, I think, at least the leagues that I've been playing in. And we got to blame that on the simple thing of Dennis Allen's, deep third free safety, position that they use in New Orleans. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the point where we're talking about Marcus Maye here in a little bit. But as far as going to Baltimore, I like the guy. I think he's highly talented. but you're slotted in there with Humphreys, Peterson, Chuck Clark. The Brandon Stevens is in his second year, which is rumored to he actually stepped in as the free safety last year because of injuries towards the end, but he's supposed to be playing in the slot. That was kind of the plan for last year. This secondary is busy, and they were injured last year, and they were lacking. So they did need this good signing. Marcus Williams kind of pepped that up. But if all these guys are healthy, they all kind of demand. We know Humphrey demands his. They're talking about Tony Jefferson playing. I believe he did it a little bit towards the end of the year, playing as a nickel back. So, there's another defensive back on the field, basically. So, yeah, it's nothing I'm rushing out to try to, put on my roster this year.
Yeah, I'd talked to some people last night about it. And Humphrey's the one because I have him in a league or two that I'm kind of interested to see how much this affects him and whether he's someone that's, drafted as really the top cornerback in a lot of places. If it's maybe time to move on from him, if you have him like in a dynasty league, because another active body, like you said, can reduce everyone's potential production. But James, how are you seeing it?
Yeah, I'm seeing it the same as both of you guys. It's a very, very nice signing from a real world perspective, but I can't imagine Marcus Williams is really going to outperform what he's done his past few seasons. He's been very adequate, and like Gary said, when the matchup calls for a good play, then you can plug in and play him. But if you're drafting him to slot him in for 16 games or 13 games or 10 games or whatever you want to slot him in for, you really just need to play the matchup. So we'll see what the defenses are when the season starts. We'll know what those matchups are as the season progresses. But you're not drafting him as a plug and play and forget. You're drafting him as a matchup guy. So if you're deeper and, that's what you draft as your third or fourth defensive back, then so be it. I think I could see him going as high as a, top 35 DB if, things go perfectly. But, that's kind of a speculative play. That's an optimistic play, and that's really not that great of a net result. I kind of want a little more higher variance guy in a league where I'm drafting that deep. So Williams is a high floor, low ceiling, pretty much the same person he was last year, and he's going to get his volume. And to Craig's point, it's interesting to see how much is going to come from Marlon Humphrey, because I think that's where some is going to come from. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be an even distribution coming back to him. But really, this is kind of I need to see some serious on-field improvement first before I want to invest highly, not beforehand.
And there was a touch of upside last year, but we don't know if it was because Baltimore's secondary was beat up like they were. But they were using last year's free safety, bringing him up in blitz packages. He did have a couple of good games. What was his name? Elliott? I'm not sure.
Sean Elliott, yeah.
Yeah, Sean Elliott. He had a couple of good games, and he looked pretty strong here and there. But we have to realize that it might have been just because of the way that he was using the secondary guys. He is one of the veterans that was left healthy at one point until he got hurt. I don't see it actually playing out. Just like James said, I'm not playing it out until I see it.
Who do you like more, Gary, still, Williams or Chuck Clark in the current situation out of those two?
And Chuck Clark loved him to death. He was a breakout call of mine. He basically broke out like he was supposed to the year that he was supposed to, but I haven't drafted him since that year. I like Chuck. I still like his upside, but there's one reason I realized that first year that I had him. Luckily, he did well, but the way they blitz, the way they use that secondary, the way they rotate players, the way they, everybody, even amongst the set, it's like the back seven or whatever you want to call it. Everybody from the linebacker back all gets kind of the same scenarios, or their number is going to be called so many times to be that guy if they're blitzing and be the guy that's actually going through. Yeah, they didn't blitz as much last year as they had previously, but there's still like one or two in the last 3 years in blitzing. And but I'm not sure they're sinking $70 million into Marcus Williams to bring him up and put him in the box any. So I'm not really excited about this. I think we might see a little bit, if they're healthy, a little bit more of a traditional deep safety like he played in New Orleans. Maybe not as bad as what he had in New Orleans Saints, but something similar.
Do you have any preference on either of them, James?
I mean, I'm going to favor Clark. I think I like Clark more. Do I really want either on my roster in a standard 12-man league starting 2 DBs? No, not particularly. Maybe Clark's a fine, DB2 low-end one. But, to enter the season is, that's kind of what we're looking forward to right now as we're in the offseason. I'm looking for high upside plays, and I feel like this defense, while the defense itself could be a high upside play, we're looking at IDPs, and I don't see anyone here stepping up and becoming, a IDP star. I see everyone just getting theirs and being very quality and playing to their matchups. It seems very predictable, not a lot of variance here, which is nice when you're looking for plug-and plays, not so nice when you're at the draft table.
If I own Humphreys, I'm holding on to him. I'm holding on to him. Yeah, I'm holding him because the simple fact is I'm used to streaming cornerbacks anyways. Yep. And you can always find another one. You just got to work it until you do. But, so if Humphreys still has that upside to be a top DB, I want to find out. Let me find out the hard way that it's not working because I'm going to get another cornerback somehow. It's not that hard.
All right. Well, we're going to go from Marcus Williams to the guy that is replacing him. They're going to keep the first name consistent. I'm going to go with Marcus Maye down there in New Orleans. He's surprising to me, 29. He feels like a guy that's been in the league for like 3 years or something. Like I was really surprised at how old he was. But 3 years, $22.5 million contract. There's basically an out after 2 with $3.6 million dead cap. He's a guy that graded out really well in 2019 and 2020, and he had his career year in 2020. He got franchise tagged by the Jets. This past year, he tore his Achilles in week 9, and he just didn't have a good season overall, kind of like the Jets. But they got a weak safety core really there in New Orleans. It's Malcolm Jenkins is the other safety. I think JT Gray is the other guy that they have. So they're probably going to bring in some other people. But with this money, it looks like they're replacing one Marcus with the other. So, James, how do you kind of feel about Marcus Maye overall? And does this signing and having him then be there in New Orleans to replace Marcus Williams move the needle for you at all?
Does it move the needle? Yeah, probably. Is it moving it a lot? Not so much. That New Orleans safety spot has historically not been a giant producer, but it's also never really needed to necessarily be one. And with the aging Malcolm Jenkins and nothing else there, likely probably maybe a day 2 pick, a day 3 pick, but New Orleans has lots of holes, so who knows how they really address it. I think that he could be a very nice production by default guy in terms of just getting lots of tackles and, maybe a few turnovers here or there and basically being one step above what Marcus Williams had been providing. Because I think he's got a little bit more big playability, so to speak. But at the same time, is there really that much of a difference? Not so much. I'm kind of grasping a little bit to find it. I think I'm going to lean towards the needle being moved. But am I going, oh, sweet, now it's time to invest in Marcus Maye? No. He's going to hang out in that, 3rd tier of safeties, 4th tier, really, if you want to have the top tier be really exclusive with just the top 2 or 3 guys. And he's just going to, be viable, be usable. He's someone who you might get a nice 2 or 3 game stretch out of, but he's not someone I'm betting on to show up and really produce for my team. He's more of a nice fail-safe, a nicer, shinier, less letters in the last name, Marcus Williams.
Gary?
Yeah, I kind of threw my piece in a while ago when we was talking about Marcus Williams. I don't like Dennis Allen's free safety position in that scheme. So I when it comes to Marcus Maye, he was a guy I wrote about a long time ago and come up with, I've followed his career. I don't think he's as good as people want him to be. He's had health issues on one end of the situation. Now he is more of a free safety coming into the league when he was playing with Jamal Adams. They were mixing and matching him for the last couple of years up there, trying to salvage whatever they could out of using Marcus Maye in that terrible secondary for the Jets. He's not done all that well. I actually think it's a step down for Marcus Williams, but it's despite whatever that situation is. I mean, production by default, I'm not sure. I want to see it because I'm at the same place I'm at with Marcus Williams. I just don't trust the position more than the player. That's really what it comes down to, is historically. Allen's been there for quite a while, and Marcus Williams has been there a lot, the whole entire time, I believe. And, it's just not working out in the box score for me. So it doesn't matter if Marcus Maye's playing it. It doesn't matter if you're sticking Honey Badger back here in the deep. It's not, I'm not interested in the position unless all of a sudden things change. And by then, there's plenty of other DBs to, worry about.
If they continue to not really have anything great at that linebacking core, if Pete Werner doesn't take a step up and Demario Davis continues to decline, do you think you'd feel a little bit more comfortable starting one of the safeties?
Not that deep one.
No.
I mean, no, not that deep one. I just, no.
Malcolm Jenkins, though, it would help.
I mean, as long as Malcolm Jenkins is there, I'm avoiding Maye altogether. Okay. Now, if you get Malcolm Jenkins out of there, it depends on who they might bring in to replace him or whatever the situation is. I suppose they could even move Marcus Maye up, but it would pique my interest. But I just don't see. I'm just not seeing that production. I'm not seeing that upper 15 ranked dude coming out of here as the safety this coming year.
Is that how you feel too, James, about it?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a little bit more better odds than what Gary thinks that he does move up, but I'm splitting hairs. If Gary thinks it's a 20% chance, I think it's a 33% chance. Is there really that big of a difference if we're talking the nuance on a DB3 guy to begin with? It's someone to keep an eye on. It's someone who can defy our expectations, and suddenly, that defense can produce a safety. It's possible, but history shows it doesn't. History shows us that Marcus Maye, while talented, is not a talent that can just defy defensive schemes. He's going to be serviceable. He's going to be fine, and it's going to go a little bit one way or the other. There's not really a whole lot to say in terms of his fantasy production. Again, that Saints defense might stink really bad, so maybe there's going to be a lot of opportunities. But I'm speculating pretty hard here because, as much as we don't like to admit it, we do still have more draft to come. We do have some more cuts to come. We have more signings to come. There's a lot that we don't know yet, so speculating on that defense being trash is hard. But I guess I would lean that way. So I lean a little bit of a bump in value over what Marcus Williams was last year because he could move up in the box. But I'm saying a lot of words to really say, don't worry about it.
Right.
Fair enough. We're going to go from safety to talking about one linebacker here tonight of our main five guys. We're going to go to Jordan Hicks. He's going to be 30 this year. He's coming off of 3 really nice years in Arizona, even despite being left for dead before the start of the season last year. Everyone thought he was going to be the odd man out. Zaven Collins, the rookie, would start over him. You guys were kind of warned by James and Gary not to necessarily buy into that, which came to be true. Hicks was still there with Simmons, and he had a very nice year. He had over 100 tackles combined. He had a career high in sacks. He had 7 tackles for a loss. So he had a nice season for a guy that people had kind of given up on. It's a 2-year, $10 million deal with an out after one, really, with a $1.5 million cap hit. Minnesota has indicated they are going to be using more mixed fronts this year as opposed to just a base 4-3, which has kind of also been indicated a bit by the recent signing of Zadarius Smith, who we're not going to completely get into tonight, but know that he's there sort of as the second edge along with Danielle Hunter. And now it looks like we have Hicks along with Kendricks as the 2 main linebackers. They still have some of the filler names, if you want to call them that, for IDP purposes. Ryan Connolly, Chaz Surratt, Tuff Borland, and Blake Lynch are sort of the guys, old stalwart. Anthony Barr is not currently signed there, so we'll have to see if he ends up coming back. But at the moment, it looks like it's going to be Kendricks and Hicks. So, Gary, how do you feel about Hicks landing in this spot as the second main linebacker for Minnesota?
I think it's a very underrated signing for Minnesota. I think anybody who's known me a few years back, his first 4 years in the league, I made a call. I said he's on my avoid list. Him and Noma Alexander. They just had these injury histories. I just didn't think it was worth anything in production or worth taking a risk at the ADPs back then. He turned himself around big time in 2018 2019 when he joined Arizona. He hasn't missed a game. He's been an Iron Man. He actually revamped his game. The first 4 years of his career, he was known as a coverage backer, not much of a run stopper. And after his Achilles injuries and a couple other, I believe he had a calf trying to fully recover from the Achilles. He had a calf injury too. But either way, I believe that you can see it in his numbers. His run stopping and getting blitz packages or getting the blitz into the backfield become a lot more prevalent than his coverage skills. Whether it's the injury or whether it was age, he's not as good as coverage, but he's more of a balanced player. And I essentially think that it's the same as Eric Kendricks at this point. So I think that they're two interchangeable guys. I actually just wrote about Jordan Hicks and released it today on GridironRatings.com. I like it. I think that it is a very good possibility from what I was reading, that they're going to use them in an interchangeable way. And I believe that they're going to go with more of a 3-4 setup base this year, where they're possibly going to have Hunter and some outside linebackers rushing, stand-up guys instead of the traditional down hands in the dirt. But when it comes to these two, I think that they're going to be interchangeable. Now, they're not going to take neither one of them off the field, and one time one of them will blitz, one time one will go in coverage, and I think they're going to use this kind of interchangeability to their benefit. So in the long run, I think that Michael Kendricks, especially if they decide to take Jordan Hicks, which is slightly younger. He's coming off a way better year. He's actually got a year and a half less wear and tear on his body since both of them were drafted in 2015 because of Jordan Hicks' injuries. I think it was something like 700 less snaps on the body, something like it was another big portion less in combined tackles. That's just less wear and tear on a guy that's just slightly younger than Kendricks. And believe it or not, Hicks didn't score above average last year, but Hicks didn't score average. Hicks has been wore out, or I apologize. Kendricks has been wore out. He was the one that was less. I think he was in the 50s and grading out. But either way, when it comes down to it, I wonder if they're going to use Hicks more as the run stopper now than what they will with Kendricks, and put Kendricks, he used to be really good in coverage a long time ago, but he maybe getting him out of the swirl of the box and I think he's getting beat up. I think he's better served and more in coverage, and I think Jordan Hicks is capable of out tackling in combined tackles. I think he's capable of doing that this year. I don't know. It's all reading the tea leaves, folks. So here's how I'm approaching both of them. I believe it enough that I'm not targeting Kendricks. If Kendricks is in a draft or if somebody's trying to trade him, I'm not going to pay that high dollar for a good IDP as normal. Yeah, but what I'm looking at is getting Hicks a little bit later in the draft, or go buying him cheap for somebody that's not believing it, because I do believe that he's got 2 to 3 more years. He can basically replace Kendricks at any point with that contract they have.
Interestingly enough, they were both drafted the same year. Hicks about a round after Kendricks, so be interesting to see if one does last longer than the other. But James, who are you liking more? Let's say for this year redraft purposes, out of those two, Kendricks and Hicks.
A lot of what Gary said is just in pure alignment with me. That being said, I'm just not all the way to where Gary is right now. I'm maybe 3-4 paces behind him. I like Hicks. I think Hicks is going to probably play alongside, and like Gary said, they're going to run that base 3-4 in general, to loosely say, since there's not a real structure to run that type of defense consistently play in and play out in the modern NFL. But still, Hicks is going to be on the field. Kendricks is going to be on the field. They're both going to produce. I think Kendricks leaving the box and moving a little bit out into coverage more. I don't really buy that. I don't buy that. I think Hicks is the guy who's likely to do that. But really, I'm grasping at trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do. I just know they're both going to get used at a high volume. I think a lot of fantasy players are probably going to come into this and go, oh, Hicks is replacing Anthony Barr. Anthony Barr was never relevant. Hicks isn't relevant. And it's an entirely new scheme there. It's a new defensive system. It's a new head coach. It's a new defensive coordinator. It's new. It's all new. And everything points to Hicks being a high usage guy, which means high production in a tackle heavy league. And do I think he's necessarily going to out tackle Aaron Kendricks? No. But would I be shocked? No, I also wouldn't be shocked. I'm definitely going to bet on Kendricks if I'm betting both of them. But I was kind of anticipating something like this happening with that defense. It's why if we, circle the clock back a month ago, I didn't have Kendricks in my top 12 linebackers. And, Hicks, I think, is very much in play to finish the year as a top 12 linebacker. Long term? No. He's still, relatively old. I think he's going to turn 30 in season. Maybe he's turning 30 in the next offseason. But still, June, essentially before the season. That's not a nice age, but that's also not an age where linebackers just fall apart and disappear and they've got 1 year left. So I'm very interested. I don't know exactly what his price is today, but it's highly likely I'm buying him at his price and I'm selling Kendrick at his price. Therefore, I'm more or less in agreement with Gary. I think both are going to produce. I think Kendrick's production will come down. Hicks will go up. And one of them could end up being a superstar. We could have a, Seattle situation like last year where you've got Wagner and Brooks and you've got two excellent linebackers. Not to say that they have age on their side like Brooks did, but in terms of just production in a redraft, I don't think that's out of the question. So I think their ceilings are very high. I think their floors are also relatively high. And I'm interested in both of them versus picking and choosing. Just, I don't know if I'm all the way there and saying that I like Hicks over Kendricks. I don't even know if that's necessarily where Gary is either, but I think Gary's closer than I
am. All right. Moving from the linebacker position, we're going to dip our toe into a little bit more of a niche area of this niche part of fantasy football. To begin with, we're going to move to defensive tackles, and we're really going to start to talk about this from leagues where you're required to start an interior defensive lineman or a defensive tackle specific, because if you're talking about your sort of general standard type of league, if there's such a thing for IDP, where you're having maybe 2 linemen, 2 linebackers, and 2 defensive backs, this guy really isn't going to come into the equation. But we're going to be talking about Sebastian Joseph-Day. He moved from one LA team to the other, from the Rams to the Chargers, signed a 3-year, $24 million deal. There's an out after 2 years, so we know how that can work. But they revamped that defensive line in general, but especially the defensive tackle spot in the LA Chargers. They still have Jerry Tillery, Christian Covington. They went and got Sebastian Joseph-Day and Austin Johnson. So there's 2 potential new starters there, and it certainly looks like Sebastian's going to be one of the starters there. And he had been productive. Now, of course, caveat with that is he had been playing next to Aaron Donald, which we know can change some things up. But he had a couple nice years there in LA before getting hurt and finishing this past year hurt. Gary, I know you're sort of into some of those nuanced leagues where you're required to start a defensive tackle. Mm-hmm. Is he a guy that you have interest in this new system with those guys that he's going to be playing with, and that's 2 nice edge rushers?
Well, he was on a roll last year at the beginning of the season until he got hurt, and then Gaines come in and pretty much just picked up that production from that point. I can't say that I'm going to be targeting him as a starter. I believe he's coming off that injury. I can't remember what the injury is, but I believe that all signs are he'll be ready for the first of the season. So I'm not spending any real capital on him. I'm not chasing him. I think he'll be, solid, serviceable. I look back again on the history of the entire Jets defensive, or excuse me, Chargers interior defensive line, and I go, eh. And I like the guy, I like the signing, but I don't know. I'm not going to go out of my way to go get him. If I've got a bench spot and I'm looking at some depth, he's definitely on there. But until I see him back on the field, see what they're going to do, it's an impressive group on paper, especially when you got Kyle, Mack, and Boza. But that interior, I just got to see it perform. There's just when you're playing, especially like you're saying, because he's definitely not a DL option in any standard leagues right now, but a DT option in a standard size league, it's somebody you want to keep an eye on. Again, maybe depth comparatively. I just don't think that the production that he had next to Aaron Donald is going to be quite available with the Chargers. So I'm looking at a low to, at best, a tier 2 defensive tackle, folks. So amongst the defensive lineman plays, that's not even serviceable. That's a bye week play, maybe.
James, how do you feel about SG Day? SJ Day, whatever. Can figure out my letters.
About this Chargers defense, has me going, ooh, I like that. And, as I previously said when we discussed Khalil Mack, it feels too good to be true. There's too much I like that I haven't seen yet happen. And I like this. I think that all signs point towards this defense being well and good and strong, and them having to stop the run, and Joseph-Day being that guy who steps in and does that, being that anchor up front. At the same time, too much has to go right. Like it feels like it's fool's gold, and I feel like I can't slot him up. He's coming off of playing with Aaron Donald, which we all know gives you a bump. I don't care who you are, because Aaron Donald is that dang good. And you're going to come in and you're going to slot in with, a totally different system, a totally different pass rushers, totally different secondary, and it's just all going to work. I just can't buy it. Heading into free agency, Joseph-Day was my 19th best defensive tackle, and he's basically going to stay there. He might slot up a little bit. I might, move him higher, especially in a redraft league, where you have to somehow start to do 2 defensive tackles if you're in that type of deeper league. But I feel like I've heard this story every offseason from some team. A new team comes out, they've got a very nice looking offense. Their defense was not very good. So what do? They spend money, they retool it, it looks amazing. And then in production, somebody's good. Most people are mediocre. Few people are bad. And it's just not what we all thought they would be. And that's just what this defense screams to me. I don't have anything more than anecdotal thoughts here, especially because it's so early in the offseason. But it's hard to say don't believe the hype on Sebastian Joseph-Day, because who's out there really hyping him? But at the same time, I can't see myself slotting him up, moving away from Aaron Donald. It just seems not. I can't do it. I'm kind of at a loss for words.
And on the opposite side of the fence, I'm really interested in Greg Gaines this year. I mean, he tested above average, or he graded out above average next to Aaron Donald, where apparently Joseph-Day did not. He was a little bit below average in his grading. But I'm more interested in Greg Gaines. I mean, I want to get that guy that's next to Aaron Donald, like we keep saying, and roll with him. He had a good season last year, and I'm not sure how many games. I think he played probably over 12 or 14 games. Joseph-Day only lasted like a few weeks, if I remember right. But
it was 7 weeks for him.
Yeah, it's beside the point. I mean, Greg Gaines, he actually showed the ability to be able to, to get into the backfield. He had 4 tackles for loss, 13 QB hits, and 4.5 sacks. And for a defensive tackle, that is upper solid. I mean, it depends how big your tier is, but it's upper solid tier 2 and low tier 1 defensive tackle numbers for sure. Maybe a little bit sweeter than that. And then defensive line or DL wise, that could, depending on how deep your starting format is, if you're starting 3 or 4 DLs, I mean, that look kind of nice as your fourth guy if it's consistent and stable. So I'm interested in Gaines. I probably will be doing a little drafting of him this year.
Are you in many leagues that require defensive tackles, Gary, or interior linemen?
Every one of them. Every one of them that I can make.
James, how about you?
Not in that many leagues that have them, but I honestly, I really like the leagues that do. I like when, you have to, find a point and a half out of a guy that you don't necessarily want to. It goes on to the manager. And we all know I love talking about settings, and I like settings that make the manager make the difference versus making the draft make the difference. And defensive tackle really is that. If you can find your right guys and play them, you can make a difference. Or you can sit there and go, this doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm going to get 5 tackles out of somebody who cares. And, one is a winning strategy and one isn't.
Yeah.
All right. And moving on to our 5th and final guy of the night here. As a reminder, we're sort of doing 5 a night here for these free agency shows. There'll be another 5 Thursday night, I believe. Right, Gary?
Yes, Thursday night. We're moving to 8 o'clock now, folks, on Thursday night for a while. So catch us, please.
Yep, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can catch Gary, JJ, and is Brandon back with you too this week?
Yeah, Brandon Jackson, which is our new writer over here at Gridiron Ratings. He's some of you formerly might know that formerly our buddy Tripp was there, but he's taken his time this off season and enjoying life, I hope. But we hope to have him back here whenever he wants to, dip back into the fantasy football takes. And but Brandon Jackson is actually, he's filling in. You guys got to go check out his stuff on site. He is cranking it out, and he's doing it the right way. I've been very impressed with him. For a guy that just actually has started writing fantasy football, and especially writing about IDP, because he originally, we don't talk about this much, but he originally wanted to be an offensive writer. And I was like, oh, come on. I knew him for a while. I've known him. He's been in my leagues for a while. I've talked to him, had an interact. I'm like, man, I said, we could use you over here on the IDP side because I've seen him run his team. So, yeah, either way, great guy. You guys join us on Thursday nights with JJ, and I'll quit rattling on now.
That's all right. Our last guy here tonight is a guy we talked a little bit about last in season, and he's going to the Chicago Bears. It's Al-Quadin Muhammad. He's going to be 27 this year. Actually, in a week, I believe he turns 27. So happy early birthday. But going from the Colts to the Bears. The Bears, as we've seen on offense and their defense too now, it's going through a complete transition, and it's going to be probably a year or two before things come together on either side, but they're moving to more of a 4-3, to James's point, however much teams actually stay in these sort of base defenses, but they're switching, and they are going to have a time doing that. They have Travis Gibson, who Gary has mentioned, I know before, Robert Quinn still.
Apologies.
That's all right. I'm just making sure that wasn't mine.
This is all me.
So Angelo Blackson, Mario Edwards Jr., they got a number of just guys there besides Quinn, and it seems like they're taking a stab at one here. 2 years, $8 million deal with an out after one for half of it, dead cap, so it's pretty much evenly spread across. He had a decent season last year playing defensive end for Indianapolis, but it really feels like it's sort of just a cheap flyer to see if he can continue to grow while they're figuring out that defense. Do you see him as that for fantasy football as well, James?
No. He's a deep league play. He's not anyone I'm really interested in spending any sort of draft capital on. Again, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but there's some guys where I need to see it on the field, and I'm going to need to see it here. I know that the Bears don't really have a lot going when it comes to the edge rushers, especially now that Khalil Mack is gone and just anyone getting to the quarterback in essence. At the same time, this guy's not who I think of when I go, oh, that'll replace Khalil Mack. He's a guy. And guys are out there, and they can sometimes have nice little games when the matchup calls for it. But drafting and investing and wanting them, no. If you are, you're just investing in potential playing time. You're not investing in the player. You're just investing in the situation. And I don't necessarily believe that this situation is going to play out super well for him post-draft. So it's almost too deep for me. It's just it's grasping at playing time versus having a thought and an opinion on a player. I don't have anything here. He's just a pass rusher of some kind.
Gary's coming off a career year last year. Do you have any hope for him?
How old is he? I mean, he's been in the league.
Turning 27.
Really? Man, I remember when he was with the Jets. That seems like I would have thought this guy was on his 12th year or something,
Year 5, 5 or 6.
Yeah, I'm not super interested in this right now. Gibson a little bit. We talked about Khalil Mack and the possibility he was gone, and I like Gibson coming up. Quinn's okay. If I remember right, isn't the DC or the defensive coordinator, or is it the head coach? Who came from the Colts?
Is the head coach.
Head coach, yeah. So I think reading into this is just bringing a player with you, and helping the team switch over, understand the language that they might use on the defense, blah, blah, blah. I don't see it much more than that. I mean, he might go ahead and start, but here's what he amounts to for me. A good, solid veteran anchor. That's it. Other than that, unless he literally he might have had his best year last year, but it wasn't a breakout year. He's never had a breakout year where we're like, oh my goodness, do we rank him in the top 15 of DLs now? That's never came in question. So I don't see that changing. It doesn't matter if he's changing uniforms. He's just playing the same scheme, and he's probably not going to be the primary rusher. So I don't have anything there.
All right. And we got a little bit of time here, so I'm going to spring a random question on you guys here yet. If you don't have an answer, that's fine, because I am bringing this on the fly.
We got to study, man. You got to give us time to study.
I just want to know, is there anyone else out there that hasn't signed that either of you does have interest in where they end up? There's a couple big names there. Some of them aren't the most fantasy productive, but, like Tyrann Mathieu, one that everyone that plays IDP knows he has that name recognition and he makes big plays. But is there anyone else out there that you know of that you think is going to be making a splash when they sign somewhere?
I've got a name. I don't know if they're going to make a splash when they sign, but it's a name that I'm still interested in, despite having lost some serious name brand value. It's Jadeveon Clowney. I still think that there's plenty left in his tank. I still think that he could be easily a DL1, edge 1 even. I don't think it's going to happen, but if he goes and he lands in the right spot, I think if he re-signs with Cleveland and they, draft some nice interior work there, I'm always interested here. Maybe it's just, bad habits die hard, but he's someone who I just can't shake, especially now that his price tag is gone and he's seen as just kind of old and done with. But he's really not. He's only 29. Like there's still intrigue there. It's not just it's over. He's no longer elite. He's the next Mario Williams, as we all know. I've got some second life that I think could spring up out of him. So I want to see where he lands. I'm always going to be intrigued there. So it's not a huge name because everyone knows it, or a surprising one, but it's still a name that I'm interested in.
Bobby Wagner, of course, is the other name that I should have just thrown out there that people are curious to see where he goes for fantasy, but Clowney's a good one. Gary, anyone that came to mind or you saw scrolling through there that has any other interest for you?
Kaiser White, possibly. It depends. I mean, it really depends on landing spot, Kaiser White has some appeal in the right system and at the right team. I thought Anthony Walker signed. I thought he signed back with Cleveland.
I believe that he had or was intending to.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I don't know if the ink has dried yet, but I don't think there's any reason to suspect otherwise.
Right. This sounds crazy at age 30 with Anthony Barr, but if that son of a gun would get a job somewhere as an outside rushing linebacker in a 3-4 scheme, I'd be real interested to see what he could do getting after the quarterback. But I mean, that's a pipe dream probably. I'm not really sure if he's going to end up back in Minnesota. There's still a lot of things they got to do with their cap. They're restructuring everybody slowly. But let me. I'm trying to look through here. I could have swore that there would have been somebody that would be. I mean, you got Von Miller. No, he's signed. Yeah, Clowney's up there, ain't he? I don't know. I'm kind of a loss for words. I think from this point on, basically it's going to be landing spot, and that might take, free agency. People can sign even after the draft, after the NFL draft. So, I mean, we've got a long ways to go to go guessing at who's going to be the next big signing and who's going to be successful wherever they land. I back on the Jordan Hicks real quick before we leave that topic. I can't believe how under the radar that. I mean, he only signed for $5 million a year.
$5 a year.
Yeah, he just handed them a deal. The only thing he said was he wanted to be able to go somewhere and be a starter. Well, I don't think that's why he took it, but he also, Minnesota probably approached him with, hey, look, we're broke at the moment. Let's get you under contract right now, and then maybe we'll talk about it next year or something. Because, they signed him for at least a couple of years to keep the claws in him. But I think it's a very underrated signing, and I think it's going to be an underrated move. It's weird to say that about Jordan Hicks when you think about his career. He's been productive the last 3 years in Arizona. He's been well worth managing. And I don't see that changing just yet. He's been playing in a 3-4 scheme for 3 years. He made the switch from a wide 9 coming out of Philadelphia. As far as I know, Kendricks or none of these guys. When was the last time Minnesota was a 3-4 base?
Long time ago.
Yeah, right. So Kendricks has never even seen that. So I like how this is stacking up for him. I think he remains up there.
Well, he'll also be competing for a division title because right now, I mean, you could argue that Minnesota team looks the best out of that division with what the issues Green Bay has had with trying to find guys on the cheap, cutting guys, losing Devontae Adams. A lot remains to be seen with these rookie picks that it seems like they're going to have and need to use what they're actually going to do with them. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Vikings win the division at this point.
Yeah. On the opposite side of the ball for the Packers, I actually like that signing today. What was it? Reed, the defensive tackle.
Jaron Reed. Yep.
Yeah, I like that tackle. I like that for Kenny Clark. Hey, Kenny, you've hung in there, man. Help's coming. Finally, somebody's going to be down in the dirt with him. What do you think, James?
I think that the Kenny Clark pipe dream must be alive and well, but I'm long gone off that wagon. Give me 6 games of Kenny Clark production, and then I'll hop back on.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to about do it for us tonight here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you, again, have questions, throw them on the YouTube. That gets checked later on. But, of course, you can find us all on Twitter. Gary, as always, is at the IDP Tipster. James is at WhatMoney3000. You can find me at RotoHeat Kraig. And if you have any sort of general questions where to find these guys, you can go over to the gridironratings.com and you can find their content there and how to get a hold of them there as well. James, any parting thoughts for tonight?
It's kind of the same thoughts you have right around this time. The draft is still a ways away for draft lovers. Free agency is kind of winding down. There's a lull in the football landscape. And usually that leads to just absolutely insane takes flying off the rails. And it's just, you got to remember, you pay attention during this time, but you aren't intaking all of this information and seeing all of these roller coaster rides of value. The values are going to go up some, they're going to go down some, but there's not going to be roller coasters here. There's going to be one direction, and that's going to be the direction they go. So the free agent signs well, they went up a little bit. Free agent lands bad, they go down a little bit. There's not a lot else going on unless you're Calvin Ridley and you get suspended. There's really not a ton that goes on today that changes the value. It's once we get into camp and we see who's playing with what team and, who's the main guy here and who's the number one guy in the secondary, who's got the dot. All of that stuff comes in the future. Right now, it's all speculation, and you can speculate, but also most of your drafts are late. Pay attention, understand, so that when stuff happens, you already know what's going on. But at the same time, don't get sucked into nothingness. You can just stay away from some of these things because there's a lot of topics that are going on that just don't need to be said.
Gary, any thoughts?
Kind of tailing off of what James said. I used to a few years ago. I wonder if people realize this, but like on NBC's Sports Edge or say Fantasy Pros, their news. I worked at Fantasy Pros as on their news desk for the IDP South for a couple of years. When you read these takes, you got to realize when you're reading these hot takes of these players getting signed on these news sites and stuff, those guys can be anybody writing that. That's why they tag the actual tweet from Adam Scheffler or somebody to back up what they're saying. But never take that as real, true fantasy football analytics. Watch where you're getting your information from, and it's just best to go beat writer right there in whatever city that you're looking for. And you can usually Google that stuff. So just be careful on those hot takes because it can get overwhelming this time of year, especially when you throw in the God Almighty rookie hype. So just be careful, be patient, don't overreact. I think is in order today. I would like everybody to go. Make sure you check out our buddy JJ's podcast, Ride or Dynasty. It's now at Gridiron Ratings, right here where you're seeing Getting Defensive on YouTube. And make sure you give that a check. He just got back in the band back together with him leading it. He had some time off last year. Make sure you check that out. It's good stuff. Do us a favor, like it, comment, help him out over there with that podcast.
All right. And that'll do it for tonight. Remember, it's 8 p.m. Eastern this Thursday for round 4 of the Free Agent Frenzy. We'll be back in a week. So from all of us here, thank you for tuning in and have a great night.